We got to go back to 1948. Was it Henry Wallace ran as an independent?
He ran as a third-party candidate. He created what was called, he and his allies created what was called the New Party. It became to be known as the Progressive Party.
And in 2000, not the same level of stature, but Ralph Nader, very important American figure, very high stature person, very serious person, runs, as the Green Party. And both of these to me from, if you're looking at it from the left, obviously Ross Perot ran a very serious campaign.
Helps to be a billionaire.
It helps to be a billionaire, and it helps to not have a left-wing message, and you can get a lot of, novelty press coverage that way. But these are the two serious left-wing third-party candidacies. And I think, Ralph Nader got about 3% nationally. Wallace got you said 3 million votes or so.
2 million.
2 million, sorry.
Actually, no, lower than that. I take it back. Wallace's 48 campaign crashed and burned.
So what's the less, I don't want to just do a kind of, morality tale about people voting third party or whatever, but I'm actually concerned strategically about this. One, I don't make any secret. I believe in tactical voting and lesser of two evils and all of that. I've never been convinced otherwise, so people know that. But even more fundamentally, the work that has been done by Bernie to bring things like Medicare for All back on the agenda, I don't think are served by getting 500,000 votes nationally for some kind of third-party thing. So anyways, that's my bias. But what is the lesson about the structural barriers to third-party politics that we have from two, I'm sure there's going to be some great people running third party, but they're not the former vice president of the United States, and they are not the most prominent consumer advocate, regulatory activist of the 70s and 80s. And they couldn't do it in any real way. So what's the lesson here?
The lesson is this. Let me preface it by saying I don't tell people what to do politically. Honestly, I think people have their journeys, and they may determine. I actually write about this in the book. They may determine at a certain point that they want to do a third party fight, and the fact is that if you look back at some of the third party fights of the 1840s, where people said there's no place in these major parties for an opponent of slavery. Right. And so I'm going to do a third-party run, James Burney being an example. He didn't get a lot of votes, but boy, and when I look at it historically, I think I like him. I think I like the person that did that. And similarly, in 1924, when Robert M. La Follette broke with the Republican Party and ran with the support of independents and socialists on a third-party run, saying that both the Democratic and the Republican Party were too much in the sway of the Ku Klux Klan and too influenced by Wall Street and military industrial complex. So I respect people who take the journey that where they choose to go in the moment they do. And history will sometimes reward them, sometimes punish. But what I will tell you is you get to the heart of the matter when you talk about structural barriers. And I write a lot about that in the book. In 1948, when Henry Wallace ran for president as an independent progressive, he did put together quite a coalition. It was he was backed by Albert Einstein and Frank Lloyd Wright and Paul Robeson and a young Harry Belafonte, and a whole host of women's rights activists who went on to become prominent figures in America. When you look at the people that backed him in 48, it was pretty amazing. But this was an intellectual left, largely. Some activists. Right. No question of that there were some very good activists on the ground around the country. He accepted the support of communists at a time when the Red Scare was rising. He was not a communist. In fact, he was a very successful businessman. But he believed that you could have a broad popular front coalition and, still govern effectively. He hated the idea of the Red Scare and called it out quite bluntly. So here's where he was. He was running this campaign. Early polls showed him doing quite well. He got on the ballots, not everywhere, but most places. And then you can just see it happen. In the fall of 1948, the media, and this is separate from structural barriers of hard to get on ballots, hard to get in debates, all these things that we also talk about. I mean, it was savage. They brought out every criticism you can imagine of Wallace. They called him a spiritualist, right? Or they said he followed gurus because he was interested in
communist who follows gurus. This is my guy.
Yeah. Well, they also they literally attacked him for being in good shape, physically good shape, because he played tennis and stuff like that. And
he's awesome. I love this guy.
He played with boomerangs, which at the time were like the frisbee of the moment, and they ridiculed him for this. He said he's a 60-year-old man who's in good shape. What the hell's wrong with him? And so when you put all the pieces together, they called him a dupe of the communists. They called him a dupe of, everybody. It was just daily brutal attacks. Now, he had brought some of it on himself. I'm not, again, I don't try to write and say Wallace was perfect. But the fact of the matter is, you cannot believe how they unloaded on him. There were literally, I have some in the book, there were literally newspaper editorials that said, hey, this is the responsible position of the, kind of newspaper editorialists. Don't throw eggs at Wallace. Don't attack him physically. Just vote against him. That's the responsible position.
Right.
And Truman fed into this and gamed it. And at the end of the day, it failed terribly. Beautiful components of it. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that Wallace and Pete Seeger and Paul Robeson and others went to the American South in the midst of American apartheid, literally deep segregation and Jim Crow, and they campaigned at multiracial rallies. Wallace refused to sleep in hotels that weren't integrated. He refused to hold rallies in rooms that weren't integrated. His vice presidential candidate, Glenn Taylor, was arrested by Bull Connor in Alabama for walking in a door that was marked non-whites, because Glenn Taylor, the vice presidential candidate, a U.S. senator at the time, said he would not, participate in the Jim Crow policies. So, I mean, important things that they did in that fight, but yet it failed. And in the book, I read a lot about a side group that's almost lost to history, and this was called Democrats for Wallace. And there was a group of people who argued in 48 that he should have fought his fight in the Democratic Party, even though he might well have lost to Truman, that he could have built out a fighting force within the party that would be an ongoing base for the left, and that ultimately would get further. Now, responsible people argue both sides. Similarly with Nader in 2000, right? You have all the arguments. What I will say is this: my looking at these things comes to a conclusion that, again, where people want to go, they should go. You must follow your vision. If somebody can talk you out of your visions or your passions in your journey, that's another thing altogether. But for those who want to fight in the Democratic Party, for those who choose to do so, what they have to understand is that it's an ongoing fight, and you will have setbacks, severe setbacks. You'll have glorious moments and great breakthroughs, but then you will have, deep setbacks, and you just keep fighting on. You build it out, you get better, you run one campaign, figure something out, and run the next. And you look at the times. Remember, how did we break through on civil rights? You say, the Democratic Party backed civil rights. Well, back in 1964, a lot of Republicans were very good on civil rights as well. But what was really happening was the movements were so big. 1970, 71. You say, well, some Republicans were really good environmentalists, a lot of Democrats, but the movements were really big. I would argue that we are now at a moment today with the coronavirus pandemic, with mass unemployment, with all the challenges we face, and with a planet that is in crisis, physical crisis, that we have a moment where a visionary politics has tremendous potential. There may be setbacks, but to give up on trying, to give up on fighting, be it inside or outside, I think it's just not acceptable. You don't get to do that. You don't get to give up. Now, again, people may choose their different routes, but if you are going to fight in the Democratic Party, people should understand they're in a fight. They should understand that the status quo, that political elites, political establishment has always existed, that it's very small, that it's, related to money, related to power, and that it will always be there. It will fight as hard as it can. It will often prevail. It will have many allies. This power will have many allies in the media. And once you recognize that fight, that it really is a fight for the soul of a party, then you fight harder. You push harder, and you don't blink. And I'm not accusing anybody of blinking. I'm just saying, now going forward, it should be a clear-eyed, clear understanding that these fights are really about whether we are going to have a functional future, and frankly, whether we're going to have a planet.
So final question then, and thank you so much for your time, and please everybody read this book. It's just such a great book. I agree with everything you're saying, but I definitely think, what just happened to Bernie is a significant, major defeat, and it's seriously bad news for the United States. It's bad news, arguably globally. And I think in some ways now is about holding whatever line you can hold for as long as possible while there's work put into primarily reviving trade unionism and whatever else. And that's kind of my view. So, I'm like you vote for the Democrat over the Republican because of marginally better National Labor Relations Board appointments and, a court system that won't, potentially outlaw union organizing, right? This is very basic stuff and the really obvious reasons to vote practically in my mind. But on the other hand, I'm not into, I think the idea that, I want people to have the fight, and I'm actually particularly interested in what someone like Sherrod Brown is going to do right now, because, for what it's worth, he represents a major state, not just somebody who, has good politics, but represents a safe blue district that really does not have the same, power incentive to be brought to bear. So, but that being said, I think these task forces are window dressing. I think Joe Biden is absolutely a product of any number of terrible political traditions. I think his core, I guess Ted Kaufman's there, and Ted Kaufman, when he was a senator for 2 years, was actually great on some banking and financial issues. So I'll give him credit where credit is due. But, we're seeing the lists. We're seeing, Bloomberg and Jamie Dimon and everybody else. And I think that's the presidency and the leadership Joe Biden represents 100%. And so, I'm holding these two positions of it's a big loss. There's no progress right now. And at the same time, of course, getting Donald Trump out of office is a no-brainer and obvious and important. But, I know that you actually have a little bit of a different read on these task forces and what's taking place. And I'd like you to see if you could cheer me and everybody else up.
Well, I've sometimes been accused of being an optimist, so watch out.
We need that.
Well, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
My friend Rebecca Solnit always says, be careful about optimism. What you really want to believe in is hope. And hope isn't naive. It says the fight's as big as you imagine, but that you still hope for the right result. And then you work toward it. So here's the heart of the matter. I think that within the Democratic Party, I'm not sure the left has always understood just how well organized the corporate forces are. But I think there's a dawning recognition of that. And I think, frankly, Bernie Sanders' 2016 and 2020 campaigns really helped bring that into focus, along with a whole host of other issues, vital issues as regards, just think of what's on the table now in a fundamental way. We are talking about Medicare for all. We are talking about, give Andrew Yang some credit for this. We're talking about some guaranteed income ideas. We are talking about criminal justice reform that might actually mean something. We just had a big victory out in Portland, Oregon for a district attorney candidate who backs criminal justice reform. So we're seeing this, we're seeing the issues shift. We're seeing the possibilities open up. And yeah, there are going to be setbacks along that way. Can you imagine, having been a anti-slavery campaigner from 1800 to 1860, mean, what frustrations, what deep disappointments along the way, and yet you carry forward, right? And the interesting thing was that many of these folks moved between different camps and different political options because they were just trying. What's the best way forward? How do we get there? How do we achieve something? They ultimately formed a political party, the Republicans, and so if you understand it as a long-term struggle, right, then you seize every opportunity that you're given, every opening that exists. And that's why I argue for the task forces, not because I disagree with the concept that they're window dressing. They are unquestionably developed to be window dressing. So here's the interesting question. Who makes the window dressing, right? You know what window dressing is, right? It's like things you put in the window, right? Or, it's like, who makes it? Who produces it? Well, if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Stephanie Kelton and Sarah Nelson and a whole bunch of other people, Karen Bass, who I actually have quite a bit of respect for as a really significant figure coming out of community organizing in California. John Kerry, who frankly on environmental issues has been quite a bit better than a lot of Democrats in all these different positions, some Biden appointees, some Sanders appointees. I'm just going to say, let's give it a go. Let's try for everything we can. Remember that there's a representative of the Sunrise Movement on the climate task force. She has already made it very clear that she intends to fight, that she intends to make this an inside-outside struggle. So my argument is that an opening has been created. It's a mistake to think that the platform committee is going to be as significant as it was in some previous moments, I think. I think these task forces effectively have become what will be the platform committee. And I think that there is an opportunity there to draw out a vision and to push it. And frankly, to push Joe Biden. I would use it. And here's the interesting thing, Michael. I wouldn't use it just to have a fight, although fights are fun and they're appropriate. I would use it to deliver a message that Joe Biden is in many ways an accidental nominee. He got a lucky break in the primary schedule. He had tremendous media cheerleading. He had, some things come together at critical points. He's very likely going to be the nominee. But unless he is a complete fool, he has to understand that this didn't come because he's got a great message. It didn't come because he's a dynamic campaigner. It didn't come because he's got a great organization. He had some things in his favor, but he was actually very lucky to get to where he's at. And now to get through November in a way that matters for him, he desperately needs to change, to get better, to understand the dynamics that are required. It isn't just to win the election. He may well win the election, but you know what really worries me, Michael? 2022. Because if Joe Biden comes in with a narrow win and does not govern with a full-on New Deal dynamism, something that really excites people and builds out coalitions and builds loyalty, then something interesting is going to happen, I would predict. And it's the nightmare of the Democratic Party in the modern era. Understand this. Let me just give you quickly. They pushed Wallace aside in 44. They put Truman in. In 46, they lost the Congress, right? They won power in 44, but then in 46 lost it at that critical stage. What came out of that? Taft-Hartley, the undermining of the labor movement, fundamental, horrible shifts. Okay, let's keep on going forward. Bill Clinton, right, brings the Jimmy Carter brings the Democratic Party back in 76, right? But in 78, massive setbacks in Congress, unable to really govern as effectively as he wants. 92, Bill Clinton gets elected, right? He has the House and Senate. 94, terrible setbacks, right? And really disempowered, moves to a hard neoliberal position. 2008, Barack Obama, an incredible victory, wins the presidency by a large margin, wins the House and the Senate. 2010, massive setbacks in congressional elections, undermines his ability to govern going forward. The bottom line is this: how you govern when you get power matters fundamentally. And the only way to make Joe Biden govern in a way that will be good for Joe Biden and his party, frankly, is to put enormous pressure on him now and to actually communicate with him logically that he has to move to a more progressive position. So yes, I would use the task forces. I'd use whatever vehicle is available. And frankly, I would use history, because the history is very, very clear on this. When the Democratic Party governs with a progressive, visionary, forward-looking vision, it tends to do very, very well, and it tends to hold its power in advance. When it doesn't do so, the modern history certainly is of a real struggle to hold on to that power and to do something meaningful. And Michael, we can't afford it anymore. We don't have another presidency to waste. Brother, I'm not here.
You're muted, Michael.
Apologies. I was muted because there was something really loud outside. I apologize. But John, I was just saying thank you so much. Really appreciate it. As always, the book is The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Politics. Grab it. Get a little dose of optimism, but most importantly, ground yourself in history. That really is, regardless of where you come down on these things, that is the number one thing. No future without a past. John, thanks so much for doing this.
I'm really honored to join you. Thanks for a great, great conversation.
Thank you so much. Stay safe. Be well.